Welcome back to What in the ADHD. My name is Sydney, and today we're going to talk about hobbies, projects, and why people with ADHD are always starting new ones but rarely finishing them. And if you're looking for solutions, stick around until the end, where I share 5 ADHD-specific brain hacks for how to finish your next passion project. Let's do this thing. If you have ADHD, you've likely taken on more projects and hobbies than you can count. And if you've ever lived with someone with ADHD, you may be familiar with this scenario. Upon returning home, you're met with pure chaos.
Bruh.
The furniture has been moved, boxes are open, and new supplies are scattered all over the room. As it turns out, your ADHD roommate had a genius idea for a house project, so they impulsively spent $300 at Home Depot and dismantled the entire living room, only to abandon the project an hour later. It'd be like that sometimes. But why? Why do we start so many things that we never finish? What in the ADHD is going on? First, let's explore why you start on a million projects. We'll get to the part where you abandon them after that. Reason number 1, novelty and dopamine. Dopamine is a neurochemical with lots of important functions, but it's mostly known for its link to pleasure and reward. In other words, it's released when we accomplish something or while we're doing things we enjoy. And in most normal brains, dopamine is released before engaging in something that might be rewarding, and this helps with motivation and attention. As you may have guessed, dopamine isn't particularly abundant in ADHD brains. However, I think it's safe to assume that if a brain naturally lacks sufficient levels of dopamine, it's probably willing to do anything to get a boost. Enter novelty. Put simply, novelty is when something is new, fresh, or different. It breaks away from the ordinary and adds a bit more uncertainty and excitement to the situation, which ultimately releases more dopamine. So it makes sense that people with ADHD are drawn to the prospect of new projects and hobbies. Starting on a fresh project gives us dopamine, a neurotransmitter we're almost always seeking. Reason number 2, impulsivity. Here's the hyperactivity part of ADHD showing up. ADHDers are notorious for making impulsive decisions, which might explain why I spent a bunch of money on a wood-burning kit 3 years ago that I still don't know how to use. Reason number 3, hyperfocus. Most people know that ADHD causes difficulty focusing, but there's a common misconception that people with ADHD can't focus on anything at all, which is far from the truth. Most of us actually experience something called hyperfocus, which is defined as an intense, almost obsessive state of concentration on a task or activity. It's called hyperfocus because we hone in on the one task for hours, virtually unaware of our surroundings the entire time. Some of us even forget about our basic bodily functions when we get into hyperfocus mode, and we'll go hours without eating, drinking water, or going to the bathroom. It's that intense. But there's something else going on here. This heightened focus can be fueled by the release of dopamine, creating a sense of euphoria and reward. In other words, it feels good when we hyperfocus on researching our next project. So here's an example. Let's say that you want to learn how to make bread. You might start with a simple Google search. But with ADHD hyperfocus, things quickly get out of hand. One thing leads to the next, which leads to a Wikipedia page, which leads to a YouTube video. And next thing you know, you've been reading about bread for 6 hours, and you also just realized how hungry you are and how bad you have to pee. So sometimes when we start a new project, it's because we hyperfocused on the subject to the point of euphoric obsession, which gave us a false sense of accomplishment before we even realized it's not something we actually want to do. I hope you're prepared to be called out because now we're moving on to part 2. Why do people with ADHD abandon so many of their projects? Reason number 1, impulsivity. Again, impulsive task initiation is what makes us start new projects, but we abandon them because of impulsive task switching. We'll impulsively shift our attention to other new and exciting ideas, which inevitably hinders our progress. That's why a lot of people with ADHD have lots and lots of unfinished projects and abandoned hobbies. Reason number 2, perfectionism. Perfectionism brings a few challenges that play into our tendency to abandon things. There's the fear of failure, overwhelm, and self-doubt. Every perfectionist, whether they have ADHD or not, sets high standards for themselves. But when a perfectionist also has ADHD, those standards can feel impossible to meet. But despite our stress, we work to make it perfect. More often than not, though, it's abandoned before it's finished because we begin to doubt our ability to pull it off. Fun fact, I almost quit working on this project, as in making this video, about 16 different times, and most of those times were because of perfectionism. Reason number 3, time mismanagement. We've all been there. You go to work on something and think to yourself, this shouldn't take long. But this time blindness is experienced more frequently by ADHDers, and because of it, we always seem to be running late, doing things at the last minute, or simply abandoning things that are taking longer than we had hoped. Reason number 4, procrastination and avoidance. Like I just mentioned, people with ADHD have a tendency to procrastinate on tasks or avoid them for specific reasons. We'll put things off till the last minute because that's when we feel the adrenaline boost to actually do the thing. We'll avoid finishing the final touches because we don't want it to be over. Our perfectionism might get in the way again and lead to avoidance. Or we may abandon and avoid projects because we're ashamed for whatever reason. Usually because people ask how our project's going and we're embarrassed about our lack of progress. Reason number 5, boredom. ADHD brains are more prone to experiencing boredom and boredom intolerance, and this mostly has to do with the dopamine aspect we talked about earlier. Most projects are somewhat long-term, which means that there's little to no reward early on, and as time passes, the novelty naturally wears off. What was once an exciting endeavor is now an old, boring idea to the ADHD brain. And reason number 6, rejection sensitivity. You may have already heard of rejection-sensitive dysphoria, but here's a quick description anyway. RSD is characterized by an intense fear of rejection or criticism, whether it's real or perceived. People with RSD are very self-conscious, and they convince themselves that others are going to reject them no matter what. So with projects, someone with ADHD might abandon one because they're afraid of what others will think of the finished product. This was another big reason for me when I really wanted to abandon making this video. I was, and still am, afraid of people hating it. Fortunately, you can help with that part by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. That is, if you want to, and you don't actually hate this video. Congratulations, you made it through the most painful part of the video. Now let's look at a few hacks you can apply next time you want to start and finish a new project. I want to remind you really quick that these hacks won't work for everyone, but they can be modified so that they do work for you. I'm just giving you framework. It's up to you to build from there and apply them. Okay, let's check these out. Remember how impulsivity was given as a reason for why you start so many projects and why you abandon them? It makes sense to me that impulsivity-based hacks should be your first line of defense. Something that works for me, personally, is leaving things in my online shopping cart for a few days before I buy them. More often than not, I'll come back to it and realize I actually don't need to buy $273 worth of acrylic paints. Imagine that. It's also helpful to keep these questions in mind next time you want to impulsively start something. Why do you actually want to do it? Is it something you've wanted to do before? What are your goals if you start this? Which brings us to setting proper goals. Now, this is something I'm really awful about, so the advice I'm giving here is the best advice that I could find elsewhere, and that is setting SMART goals. Each letter stands for something: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I know goal setting isn't super exciting when you'd rather be hobbying or projecting, but it can save you a lot of time, money, and frustration in the long run. Next is building your prioritization skills. If you don't prioritize individual projects or hobbies, they'll all feel like a priority, which only leads to overwhelm and more abandonment. These skills can also be useful for prioritizing tasks pertaining to a single project. It's best to break things down into smaller chunks first, and then you can start to prioritize them based on importance, urgency, or dependencies. And even though prioritizing is something that's inherently difficult for ADHD brains, there are plenty of methods and tools you could check out that might be useful to you. Another thing we should all probably work on: getting rid of our perfectionist mindsets. And I know this is all much easier said than done, but reminders are good for us, so bear with me. Try to keep in mind that perfectionism is counterproductive, especially if you have ADHD and you're also prone to procrastination, boredom, and rejection sensitivity. And remind yourself that the things you're hyper-focusing on perfecting probably aren't as big of a deal as you're making them out to be. Your new mantra is progress over perfection. And you can keep your perfectionism in check by seeking feedback from others at different stages of your progress. Hopefully what they have to say will keep you from spiraling into trying to perfect everything. And last but not least, stay motivated and inspired. You can do this a few ways. One of my favorite ways to encourage sustained motivation for myself is writing down my reasons. If you can find and remember your why, you're less likely to give up on something. Just make sure you write it down so you don't forget. Another way to stay motivated is to involve others, whether that's for encouragement, accountability, or just general community. ADHD coaches are perfect for this sort of thing, as are accountability buddies. You can also search for Facebook groups to find other people working on similar projects or hobbies. Okay, friends, that is all I have for you today. I hope you learned something new. I also hope that this was at least a little bit relatable and helpful, and that you're able to finish the next project that you start. Remember, having ADHD makes you prone to all kinds of things, like hyperfocus, perfectionism, boredom, avoidance, and impulsivity. And all of these things can affect the frequency at which you start new projects and hobbies, and how long you stay committed to them. But just because you have ADHD, and just because you may have abandoned 941 projects in the past, doesn't mean you're not capable of sticking to an idea and creating something amazing. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. And definitely let me know what you're working on in the comments. I'd love to be a source of accountability and encouragement for you while you tackle your next project or hobby. Some of you may have noticed that I've just recently come back to YouTube after some time off. Since this is now my main source of income, I plan on posting as many videos as I have ideas for. So if you have any topic requests, leave a comment down below, or you can send me an email at whatintheadhd@gmail.com. Oh, and the only social media platform I'm really active on these days is Twitter, so be sure to follow me on there. Thanks so much for watching. Stay weird.